Michael Lear, board member at the Impact Capital Forum, and in my day job, I'm a private wealth advisor at Capital Group here in New York. I'm still sitting in my home in New Jersey, but it looks like in a couple of weeks I'll be back in the city. So thanks for joining us. Before I get started, I'd like to share with you some background on the Impact Capital Forum. We were founded in 2003, and as the Impact Capital Forum is the new name, it was previously called the Microfinance Club of New York. Since that time, we've expanded our scope to address all aspects of financial capital, human capital, technology, and natural resources that benefit the world through the lens of financial services. Impact Capital Forum now has over 3,500 individuals in our network. Most members are professionals with a background in financial services, financial inclusion, and fintech. However, membership is open to anyone who supports the club's mission. We host approximately 25 events per year on a wide range of topics. And in fact, next week, on May 12th, we're having a conversation on income share agreements and how they can provide a vehicle to promoting racial and social equity. If you enjoyed today's discussion, and I'm sure you will, I encourage you to consider membership. It's relatively inexpensive and a great way to support our community. And with that, I will turn it over to Molly. Molly, take it away.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you, Impact Capital Forum, for making this possible. I think we're going to have a really good panel today. I'm Molly. I'm calling in from Brooklyn. I'm a member of the Impact Capital Forum and also a student at Bard College's MBA in Sustainability program, where I'm finishing up my capstone project on the topic of energy and environmental justice. So really excited for our conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about creative approaches to financing inclusion as a part of the transition to a clean energy economy. I'm planning to talk to each of our panelists, and we should be having one more panelist who's hopefully able to join a little later. But I'm planning to speak to each of them about an innovative approach to finance where they found success before asking a few panel questions and then opening it up to some audience Q&A at the end. But there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to ask questions throughout or ask questions and introduce yourself in the chat as well. First, I want to introduce our exciting panelists for today, starting with Cullen Kasunic. He's the CFO at BlocPower, an energy efficiency developer and climate technology startup that uses innovative financing and energy data to drive adoption of clean energy products in urban areas like New York City and nationwide. Over the past decade, Cullen's worked across energy asset classes to increase tech adoption through financing. And today I'll be asking about BlocPower's recent climate impact note released through the crowdfunding platform Raise Green. Thanks so much for joining, Cullen.
Hey, Molly, thank you very much. Mike, thank you. So I head finance at BlocPower. We really try to make buildings cleaner, healthier, and smarter. We work a lot in low-income communities, and so this is an area that's very near and dear to our heart. We focus in on buildings that are maybe underserved by other energy efficiency folks. So you might see other folks out there doing single family home energy efficiency or energy efficiency for office buildings or industrial facilities. But we focus on what we call a mid-sized building category, which if you look at the numbers is actually most buildings in the US that are not homes are these sort of mid-sized buildings. And we've spent a bunch of time looking at project finance. That's my background for a while in the energy space, as Molly mentioned. And we spend a lot of time looking at finance to be able to help the adoption of energy efficiency and streamline the process, reduce risk for customers. But really what we do is we're the folks who sit in the middle of an energy efficiency transaction for these buildings and really make sure that all the things happen, right? We make sure that the permits get done, the technology is chosen correctly, the financing there, the government relationships are there. And so with that, we can see projects get done and we can have carbon reduction and energy savings and all the other benefits that come with it.
Great, thanks, Cullen. Next, I'll introduce Joel. Joel Blaine is the manager of business and project development at Grid Alternatives. He works to develop solar for multifamily affordable housing, as well as community solar projects, focusing on innovative financing models to move projects forward for low-income communities. I'll be talking to Joel about how PRI investments in projects helped attract additional funding and also deliver higher savings to low-income communities. Thanks for joining, Joel.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Molly, and great to be on the panel here with you, Cullen. As Molly introduced, I'm Joel Blaine, he, him, his, and I'm calling in from Denver, Colorado. I work on Grid's policy and business development team, which is based in our headquarters in Oakland, California. Grid is a national nonprofit with the mission of providing access to renewable energy technology and renewable energy job training in all communities. We were founded in 2004, so we've got a little bit of history behind us in California with a focus on low income residential solar. But since then, Grid has now expanded to having a national footprint and an expanded scope that includes solar in addition to storage, clean mobility in both the single family, multifamily, and commercial nonprofit space. And my role, as Molly alluded to, centers on developing innovative financing solutions for our commercial and community solar development, and then supporting the development of strategic initiatives here at Grid.
Great, thanks so much, Joel. And I see our last panelist has joined. Jason, good to see you. You're just in time for finishing up our introductions here. Jason Moore is a managing director at the New York Green Bank on the investment and portfolio management team, where he works to accelerate the deployment of clean energy assets in New York by structuring and executing transactions for clients and business partners. I'll be asking Jason about how the New York Green Bank was able to adjust their credit requirements for community solar to make low-cost clean energy available to more New Yorkers. Thanks for joining, Jason. I'll let you introduce yourself as well, if you'd like.
Thank you, Molly. And the return to the office has not gone as smoothly for us as I hope it is for others. Had some IT issues, but I'm on my cell phone in a conference room. Hopefully this is going to work. But I really appreciate the invitation to speak to this group today, Molly. Supporting disadvantaged communities through making investments is a critical aspect of what we do at New York Green Bank. It's been mandated to us as part of the CLCPA, and I'm excited to kind of share, specifically in community solar, how we've made some improvements to our process to address those issues. I've been with New York Green Bank for a little over 5 years. We're a state-sponsored investment fund, allocated over $1 billion, we were allocated $1 billion of capital, and we've invested almost $1.5 billion to date through recycling that capital into new investments. So I'll stop there for now and look forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I appreciate you making the additional effort to join. Sure. Yeah, on my side, working from home has its own challenges. So very, very sympathetic. I understand. Okay, I'm going to go back to Joel. Can you tell us a bit about your partnership with the Boulder Housing Partners, and particularly the recent project with North Boulder dedicated to low-income households?
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks for the question. Yeah, this is a project we're really excited to talk about. Grid has had a long kind of standing role in the community solar space for a few years, but we're constantly looking for ways to deliver more benefit to the community and build projects in hard to reach areas. So this project in particular was a 630 kilowatt ground mount solar garden in Boulder, Colorado. And that was done in partnership with the local housing authority, Boulder Housing Partners. So we partnered with the local housing authority to win capacity award from the utility for a 100% LMI dedicated solar garden. Boulder Housing Partners is acting as the master subscriber in this arrangement, ensuring that 100% of the offtake is accounted for, and then enrolling their properties and tenants in that garden to receive those solar benefits. The savings will benefit both the housing authority as well as tenants, and savings to the housing authority are, help with the operational cost savings, and then can be directed towards additional community benefits through their programming. And this project was installed during the pandemic at a time of rising energy costs in the state and deeper housing and energy insecurity. And so the roughly 25% of utility bill savings that we're providing through this project feel about as poignant as ever. I have to share the installation photos at some point, because you also get a glimpse of every aspect of Colorado weather, including the wildfire storm clouds that rolled in just up the street.
Yeah.
So Grid incorporates workforce development and job training in all of our installations. And for this Boulder project, we were able to work with Grid's tribal team as the EPC provider here. The tribal team recruited and provided hands-on training for 16 trainees throughout the build. And these trainees came from tribal communities across the country. It was really rewarding to see the tribal team activated at a time when a lot of their construction had shut down just due to the impacts of COVID. And also, happy to report that 5 of the individuals who received training went on to receive full-time employment in the solar industry after this project. And so really seeing kind of the transition of that training go into economic growth and workforce development. And some of what we're excited about with this project was the unique way in which it was financed and really kind of the focus of my work. So in this, Grid partnered with a for-profit entity. It was a spinoff of Dividend Solar, which is one of the larger residential solar lending platforms. We partnered with this group on a grant from the Department of Energy to pilot and streamline impact investing for LMI dedicated solar financing. With a focus on program-related investments and private foundation investments. So the Boulder project was our inaugural project funded using this blended capital approach of combining impact investments with traditional capital as a way to provide deeper savings to subscribers and fund harder to fund projects using that kind of catalytic capital approach. We raised an initial $3 million in impact investments from private foundations and donor advised funds. And then using that seed money and initial commitment, we're able to raise an additional commitment of roughly $25 million in tax equity from kind of the traditional market that collectively can help support these high impact solar projects. And so on this Boulder Community Solar Project, blended capital approach, which uses a combination of lower cost impact investment debt to provide greater savings and lower the risk profile for traditional investors, allowed us to bring in that tax equity capital and build a project that we weren't able to finance using traditional financing alone. We went out to several kind of off-the-shelf providers and weren't able to get financing that was able to deliver savings to customers. So really happy to see that result. And, I also just want to call out that we try to work in areas where, there are incentives and areas where there are not. And so using this blended capital approach in Colorado, where the utility rate we were working against was 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and being able to beat that by, 20 to 25% felt like a real win for this impact investment and blended capital approach. And on top of that, the end result is being able to deliver those meaningful energy cost burden reductions and as mentioned before, kind of the workforce development opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some really big benefits you highlighted there. And you touched a little bit too on maybe the hard to finance aspect. And I'm curious, with a project like this, that's not just supporting LMI communities, but actually dedicated 100% LMI. Does that carry the perception of additional risk? And is that a reality for a project like that? Yeah,
it really is. The perceived risk or actual risk of the LMI customers is a concern for a lot of traditional investors. And there's a lot of really good and really smart folks working on that issue, beyond Grid. I think some of the folks here on this call, from a policy side, from alternate credit rating approaches and other kind of creative financing. Some of what allowed us to be successful in the space has been our approach to partnering with some of these institutional off-takers like local housing authorities. So, partnering with them to provide the backstop and a pool of, subscription-ready customers was really important to, lowering the risk profile and bringing kind of traditional investors on board, and even philanthropic investors for that matter. And similarly, partnering with impact investors to access lower costs of capital and really ensure that we were delivering greater savings was a way of, one, demonstrating the impact that we were delivering, but also, again, lowering the overall risk profile by having guaranteed savings for LMI customers. It changes the paradigm of, if they were to default or problems with fulfilling that subscription right, the result is going back to a higher utility cost, and ideally that's going to promote, greater participation, and again, helping with kind of the debt service coverage ratio of the overall project. So these impact investors are really important in creating kind of those meaningful savings and then priming the pump to get traditional investors on board. And our impact investors also really appreciate the opportunity from this blended capital approach to be partnered with traditional investment and help that, impact capital and philanthropic dollars go further than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And I think you also mentioned partnering with the Department of Energy to scale up this, right, and help streamline these types of investments in the future. Can you talk more about how you're doing that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so as mentioned, we partnered with a for-profit. They're called Distributed Resource Ventures, again, a spinoff of Dividend Solar. And the grant from Department of Energy went to support the streamlining of this blended capital approach. And so together we're working both on, obviously raising the capital from the philanthropic and traditional markets, but also building a web platform that makes that whole transaction process a little bit more streamlined and turnkey. So there's seem to be a lot of interested folks in doing impact investing, and particularly program-related investments. And for those that don't know, PRI, program-related investments, IRS designation of ways that private foundations and others can do impact investing and still qualify for their disbursement. But using this platform as a way to streamline and standardize that transaction process, make it an easier opportunity to get involved, and then partnering it with traditional capital to go further. I think the other novel thing there is that Grid brings a pretty strong pipeline, with our national presence of scale, and that's something that a lot of investors are looking for, an ability to invest in kind of a larger portfolio as opposed to one-off opportunities.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Joel. If it's all right, I'm going to move on and talk to Jason, and then we'll come back and ask all the panelists some questions at the end. But I wanted to pivot to Jason and hear a little bit more about New York, and particularly the Green Bank supporting scaling up community solar at the state level, and working with NYSERDA on New York Sun. Can you tell us a little bit about that project, and particularly how you managed to drive inclusion of participants from low-income communities?
Thanks, Molly. Community solar is very exciting in New York State for many, many reasons. I think it really does serve to level the playing field, allowing participants who have never been in the market to enter. People like renters, people who may or may not have good credit. So it really is a levelization of the playing field that we really haven't seen in renewable energy. There are a lot of ways that New York State is approaching it. One, you mentioned policy, and I think that the value of distributed energy resources, or VEDR, is a critical policy aspect to what makes community solar successful in New York, and will continue to make community solar successful in New York, because that factors in not only just the power costs that you would typically see, but it has a time of use component with that power cost, capacity. It has environmental value factored into what those credits are worth. So the policy environment in New York is very supportive of community solar. NYSERDA has provided wonderful incentives for all types of distributed generation for solar, whether that's rooftop or ground mount or anything in between. But what I think is particularly interesting with New York Sun was their offering called Solar for All, which was a way that NYSERDA could support the inclusion of traditionally marginalized communities that didn't have access, that didn't have the credit profile that a typical bank investor would be looking for. That program came in with effectively credit enhancement, where NYSERDA stood behind those LMI subscribers. And then, what I'm obviously most excited to talk about is New York Green Bank and what we've been able to do in the community solar market over the past 4 to 5 years. Very early on, we were addressing things like interconnection costs because due to the interconnection queue in New York and the way that it had to be reorganized, because frankly, 5 years ago it was a mess. They worked diligently to clear that backlog out. But what that created was an opportunity to address a capital need for New York Green Bank. We did interconnection bridge financing for well over $100 million of interconnection costs for community solar projects. That naturally flows into construction financing, term financing, with or without third-party tax equity. So either on a back leverage basis or a project level basis. And over time, we really evolved from a cash flow credit perspective to understand that LMI customers can be great credits for these types of projects. And the assumption with a traditional financial institution is that they're not, that LMI is risky. So the initial projects that we saw getting done all had 20-year agreements to buy credits, and the subscribers had to be homeowners. They had to have 700 FICO or above. I mean, if you think about New York State population center, downstate in the New York City area, there's a significant portion of renters that are just excluded, regardless of income level. They were just excluded from the earlier community solar projects because they didn't own their own home. And then obviously when you look across the state, I think it plays out that renters are more likely to meet the criteria of an LMI customer than a homeowner. So we saw that was a problem in those first deals that we did, and we really felt compelled to address that problem. So we rolled our sleeves up. We did the homework, and what it comes down to is in New York State, in the community solar tariff regime, the credits that are generated stay on the host meter for up to 2 years. So if you can't sell them immediately, they're not lost. It's not like a rooftop solar installation with a PPA where your customer stops paying, and then you have 20 years of cash flow that you've lost. You've lost 1 month, maybe 2 months of cash flow, because what happens is you stop allocating credits to those customers who are not paid. And then the second piece of the puzzle is you can reallocate credits every 30 days in New York. Other jurisdictions do it annually or maybe semi-annually. Some do it monthly as well, but those two components in particular really mitigate the consumer credit risk. And that's before we start talking about consolidated billing, where the utilities are going to step in and take that consumer credit risk because they're already taking it on provision of electricity to begin with. So the market is migrating toward the implementation of consolidated billing, where the utilities are going to effectively purchase the receivables and take the credit risk. And that's going to be a game changer as well. At New York Green Bank, we couldn't be happier to see that. We are committed to investing at least 35% of our portfolio into disadvantaged communities, this has been one of the first areas where we've been able to make inroads, and obviously have given a lot of effort to affordable housing and other spaces as well. But community solar is truly a leveling of the playing field that was desperately needed in the renewable energy markets in New York and across the country.
Yeah, thanks. Just to be clear, so if it started at 700 credit score or above, and you kind of needed to be a homeowner, which seems crazy for a program where the main benefit is you don't need your own roof. Where are you setting that level now?
We have no customer requirements. Initially, when we first relaxed our, I'll give you the evolution. So the first thing we did is we went and we said, look, let's create a 20% bucket. So 20% of the subscribers, they don't need a FICO score. They don't need to be a homeowner. You have to give no underwriting information on those customers to us. And that opened up a bucket for participation of LMI customers. And we started to notice that a few other financial institutions were getting comfortable with that, so we decided to take an even more aggressive stance where we said, all right, no FICO requirements for subscribers, but we do want to see 36-month payment history with the utility, to have some sort of understanding of the risk that we're taking. And we did that a few times, and now basically we have gotten comfortable, and we see the private financial institutions getting comfortable more and more every day with the simple fact that the customer is current on their utility statement. They're not currently in default with Con Edison or NYSEG or whoever they pay for their electricity. And if they're paying for their electricity, I think it's on the theme that Joel hit on, they're getting a discount versus what they would pay otherwise. So if they're paying their electricity, they would much rather pay 10% less or 5% less, for community solar. There's a little complicating factor right now in a lot of the utility zones, because there's the dual billing. There's the billing for the community solar credits that show up on your utility statement, and then you have to pay that statement. But with the implementation of consolidated billing, that goes away, and the market will. There's a huge addressable market here, I couldn't be more excited about offering that access to everyone, regardless of income, regardless of home ownership status. It really is a great thing for the renewable energy goals of New York State.
Great, thanks, Jason. I guess one more question. How does this program align with Green Bank's mission and goals in terms of accelerating investment into this market?
Yeah, every time, let me back up. New York Green Bank does have the explicit objective to address financing gaps, to transform financial markets, and that that could be viewed as a very lofty statement where we're going to change everything that's being done. But I want to be clear about something. We're not here to distort financial markets. We're here to accelerate. And what I mean by that is I want to take a view today that I expect every bank on Wall Street is going to take 2-3 years from now. Provide that gap filling capital where I can prove out the financeability of certain structures with certain underlying credit metrics. And 2 or 3 years later, the cost of that capital is going to come down. I have to charge a premium for it right now, but the cost of that capital will come down over time as more and more financial institutions enter the space. And that's really what I mean about acceleration. Getting what the market is working on done faster. Making it happen this year, next year, rather than 3 or 4 years down the road. Not using financing as a policy tool. I want to be completely clear about that. New York Green Bank is a market-based financing organization. We are not policymakers. We invest capital, we earn a rate of return, and we sincerely hope that we get put out of business in each sector that we work in. Right now, if we're talking about community solar, I hope that I am not doing any community solar investing 2 years from now. I want to be focused on battery storage or electric vehicles or affordable housing or whatever, wherever we are needed. Being put out of business in each sector for New York Green Bank is a great thing. That means that we have accelerated the market. We see that in the rooftop residential space right now. 6 years ago, we were doing rooftop residential securitizations, basically. And the markets were frozen. The traditional investors were just not there. But New Yorkers still were demanding liquidity for rooftop solar installations across the state. and we were able to step in with some much needed liquidity in that market. Now we don't do much of it. We did one rooftop deal last year, I think. Those deals are paying off. We're recycling that capital into energy efficiency, into LMI, into EVs. So that's that aspect of acceleration, having the private sector fill the gap that we've bridged, and then moving on to the next thing.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jason. And that actually really set me up well for our next panelist, which I was hoping would happen. It's going to pivot a little bit away from solar to energy efficiency. Cullen, BlocPower primarily works on a different model, bringing cleaner energy into people's homes through energy efficiency and heating and cooling upgrades. Over time, the projects generally, they pay for themselves through savings. Does that make it easy finding funding?
Yeah, it's actually, it makes it a bit easier, right? There's been a lot of interest from folks as we went out. So I'll step back, right? We finance energy efficiency improvements that are generally anchored by air source heat pumps for both heating, cooling, and hot water. And then also insulation, air sealing, water saving measures, LED lights, monitoring control systems. If you know energy efficiency, you know this is a pretty basic, pretty core package of materials. Increasingly, we're also getting involved in doing electrification, which is really all of that. But then in addition, it's dealing with electrification of appliances, tying in with solar, car charging stations, any of the other things that, storage, any of the other things that may be associated with that. And so really there's been a lot of interest in serving this sort of multifamily, mid-sized building space, but it's historically been underserved, but it had a lot of challenges. So just because the buildings could, the improvements could pay for themselves with the savings, that helped, but that didn't get the whole way there, right? So to sort of line up this funding, we had to spend a lot of time talking to a lot of folks. In fact, we had a lot of great conversations with the New York Green Bank, among many others. And a big part of it has been getting investors familiar with the technology and the fact that it's a bundle of assets, not just one. Generally, because the heat pumps cost a large portion of the project, we sort of anchor the project with the heat pumps. And that helps in that regard to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And then, of course, we also need to monitor those and control those. And of course, we don't want air just flowing out everywhere. So we need to do some air sealing. We need to do insulation on some key walls, right? We're not necessarily diving in and doing the deepest retrofit of everything, but what we are doing is providing a sort of a consistent package that we can finance, that we can stamp out and offer cost effectively. So, with some of the smaller buildings, right, with a single family home, there's a lot of consistency. With a larger building, you can spend a lot of time and money to figure out what's going on at the building. In our building size, we actually had to build software so that we could cost effectively assess the energy efficiency needs there. And so in doing that, then we can finance it and offer a relatively standard package, right? But because it's not a big property, there's just not as much ability to sort of customize every little thing. And then so that consistency, though, did help us as we went to financing, right? So that we could say, hey, look, we're doing a bunch of these. These projects might be $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, right? We'll do projects up to $1 million, many millions of dollars, but a lot of them are in this sort of $50,000 to $250,000 range, which, if you know anything in solar too, is a hard place to scale, especially if you have some differences from project to project. So we've sort of standardized that, and that has helped us. But then you have other differences you have to deal with from solar, because a lot of folks, when they talk financing, sort of anchor in solar. And we have a different type of savings in that it's savings from fuel switching. So you can really look at energy savings and carbon savings and dollar savings differently, right? There may be cases where you're saving a lot of energy, but not necessarily saving a lot of dollars. And so we need to optimize to make sure that we're saving dollars as well, so that the customer gets their savings, their payback. Also, a different thing that we deal with is we're putting infrastructure into these buildings that it's not only about savings, right? When you install solar on your roof, you get something that looks cool, and you save money because you're buying electricity from, you're getting electricity from a source that can give it to you for less cost than the outside grid, right? And so in our case, you're getting fuel switching savings, you're getting actual efficiency of system savings, right? So the new system is using less energy than your previous system. And then you're using often, especially when we're going from oil to electric, and then in a lot of areas from gas to electric too, you're getting your fuel type savings. But with that, it's not the only thing you're getting, right? You're getting a heating and cooling system. So we try to put it in so that the customer can save over time based on the savings alone, right? But this is kind of like, hey, go to the car dealership and you're going to get a Tesla, and the fuel savings alone from your switch from your SUV to your Tesla, that's going to buy your car for you. That's kind of a lot to ask, right? But that's what we try to do. And so that does make it attractive to folks to buy in, right? To building owners. But it also is a situation where they're getting more. And so, you know, we provide health benefits as well that come with this, right? If the whole building switches off of fossil fuels, then suddenly asthma in the neighborhood can go down. And if the whole neighborhood is doing that, that can help. And then if we switch someone from a natural gas stovetop and oven to an electric stovetop and oven, right? And they have very high efficiency induction stovetops now that work better than gas, right? They're faster to boil water. If we put those in, we suddenly increase the indoor air quality of all of the residents, right? So, I mean, these are all things that make it very attractive, but these are all also wrinkles that
Right.
folks need to learn and understand when we talk about financing with them, and when we talk about financing with both the investors and the building owners.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of benefits there, but to your point, it's not displayed on your roof, and sometimes they involve a bundle of services instead of kind of one main project. So with those wrinkles, how did that lead to crowdfunding and the climate impact note that BlocPower released?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, just getting into the funding generally, you have to get into this sort of chicken and egg situation where how are you going to get financing before you have building projects? How are you going to get building projects before you have financing? And really, we work through that through sort of like a one step by step time, get a project, work with people who want to just buy the projects before they finance it, so that we get enough traction on each side and continue conversations in parallel. You know, talking about, and so this is sort of like working with our existing investors like IPC and Goldman Sachs to get on the road to being able to put out something like this climate impact note, right? We had to build a sort of a credit underwriting box together so that we would say, okay, like we were hearing from the New York Green Bank, everyone seemed to think that low income credit is bad, but it's not necessarily bad. So what we did is we worked with our investors to really look at each of these buildings holistically and take a sort of a community lending approach like your local bank might provide, not your national bank, but a local bank or credit union might come in and look and say, okay, we're going to underwrite this building. What's your debt? What are the other debts that you have? What's the equity left in the building? How much cash flow does this have in the building? How long are your tenants there? And try to understand what's going on. And with that, we're able to underwrite really all types of low income buildings and low income tenancy, right? So we don't generally lend to the tenants themselves or lending to the building owners. So it is a business, but we're serving the low income community that way. And so by getting this traction, we were able to get sort of this critical mass of projects and financing and knowledge of what we're doing, that we said, hey, you know, the company back in 2013 and 2014, when it was founded, sort of built on the mission of bringing blocks of energy efficiency improvements out to the public for them to invest in. And so we might say the concept would be, hey, church, invest in doing a retrofit for your energy efficiency and get all your congregation and your community to invest in it, right? And so it's a logical jump that, you know, when the company did that, it was sort of early on in the law to be able to do this and early on in the acceptance of crowdfunding. But as we turned and did a whole bunch of other things in the energy efficiency space, we came back and realized, wow, this is the opportunities available with crowdfunding and with this climate impact note are so similar to what we want to do. We can bring back these energy efficiency improvements to the community. And it's really borne itself out, right? We set about 2 months to raise $1 million of crowd funds to go into energy efficiency improvements in buildings, low income, not low income, but just generally climate impacted buildings. And so we raised this in just over half that time, right? So about 35 days. And so this has shown that about 250 investors from $100 up to $50,000 each have come in and said, hey, we really care about what's happening at these buildings. We want to make something happen that's going to improve this. And by the way, wow, we can get an investment return while we do this. I mean, crowdfunding is a great way to serve LMI because people like helping people, right? And so now it's not just like Kiva or some of those earlier microcredit ones where you would invest and sure, you're not donating your money, you get to keep your money, but you're not earning a return. Now there's opportunities for folks to get out there with projects, right? Project developers like BlocPower to get out there and say, hey, we're going to put some improvements into these LMI communities, into these frontline communities, these climate impacted communities, and we can let you help and we can give you a good return while we're doing it, right? I mean, we issued on the last climate impact note, we issued a 5.5% interest rate, which for a retail investor is a very strong interest rate. And so, you know, that's been interesting. And so I think, you know, crowdfunding's been good for us. I think it's good generally because of this. And it's something that we'll likely consider again in the future.
Great, thanks so much, Cullen. Appreciate it. So I've got a few more questions for the panel generally, but I want to remind everybody that if you want to add any questions, I think we'll have a little time at the end for some audience Q&A as well. I don't think I see any that have come in yet, unless I am new to the Q&A function and might not know how to read it. I think we're still waiting on our first question. So to get us started, we've touched on policy a few times, and especially with President Biden recently setting some priorities around inclusion and environmental justice. I wanted to talk to our panelists a little bit about that. And if it's okay, I might start with Jason, especially because some of these policies somewhat mimic New York's Climate Act that I think you were alluding to earlier, focused on funneling investment to disadvantaged communities. So do you see out of these policies any future impact on the way funding flows into these projects?
Molly, that's a great question, and I'm gonna take it maybe in a bit of a different direction. Over the past 4 years, you know, we saw a pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. We saw a lot of support at the federal level for climate change initiatives go by the wayside. What that created was this vacuum where states like New York and Washington and California, and in fact, over 14 states joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, which in large part committed to keeping what we agreed to under the Paris Accords. And New York State was a leader in that. And I know New York Green Bank, I know other folks all across the country were very, very busy over the past 4 years, making sure that we didn't drop the ball on all of the urgent things that we needed to address to mitigate climate change. And now with the shift in thinking at the federal level, I think you're going to see a lot of things being adopted from New York at the federal level, from other states, you know, at the federal level. You know, California's done some great things with energy storage. I would expect a lot of their successes to be replicated at the federal level. Now, New York's doing great stuff with energy storage as well, and I would expect those things to be reflected. So it's really an inspiring time to see the change at the federal level because the people on the ground, the boots on the ground, have been out there solving these problems with very little support from the federal government for the past 4 years. And now that the political climates have changed and there is support for climate change mitigation at the federal level, you're going to see those efforts pay dividends. In particular, as it relates to LMI and disadvantaged communities, the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, they've recently established a new office for diversity, equity, and inclusion, really making sure that investments are made in disadvantaged and other marginalized communities. We certainly at New York Green Bank are encouraged by that leadership at the federal level, and we stand ready to work with people at the federal level or people in other states to roll out solutions that make sense. Because as developers very rarely focus on one geography, especially as they scale up. Larger developers that can really move the needle in terms of investment into disadvantaged communities, they're active all across the country. So having that cohesiveness at the federal level, using the learnings that individual states and organizations, non-government, groups like Block and others, that have been out there solving problems. I think there is a lot of potential in the market to address some of the most critical issues that we face.
Yeah. I'd like to open up the question to Cullen and Joel as well. Any changes you see coming as a result of, as Jason was saying, getting that support at a federal level now?
I think I can answer this question with a quick answer, which is, for all the billions of dollars that are slated to go towards energy efficiency improvements, out of the trillions that are slated to go towards energy and infrastructure as a whole, 40% are targeted to go to low-income communities and other frontline communities. And so I see that helping us raise funding. I see that helping us be able to provide more viable projects in more communities. It gives us a big problem actually at BlocPower, which is a good problem in that there is now a nationwide opportunity for us, whereas previously, we worked a lot in the States based on what Jason was saying, right? States had strong policies and we worked with those states, and we will continue to work with those states, right? Because we have good relationships and there's a lot of learning and prototyping that can come out and go nationally. And now part of our challenge is let's go nationally, right? So we're actually trying to scale up our company to do that. And so we are thinking about putting out some additional investments to Fortune 500s and foundations. And so that's probably something that's similar or up your alley, Joel, that is worth these types of cross conversations. And so, yeah, I think that the sort of the mindset, the national mindset is there.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that as well. I think what kind of this national approach is kind of the most influential change that we're seeing. Obviously, the tons of money being committed towards kind of this National Green Bank and other initiatives, and not just the lip service, but kind of dedication towards the LMI communities is great. But I think one of the things we're most excited about is kind of the bringing of best practices to a national scale, and like Cullen alluded to, opening it up beyond just kind of the markets that are ripe or have been ripe for this kind of work to kind of a national platform. So.
Great, thanks. Joel, I might go on to my next question for you. I think we've got about 6 minutes left. Are there any, in terms of financing, are there any hurdles that you're still attempting to overcome? And do you have a vision for how, folks at the Impact Capital Forum might be able to help?
Yeah, we are always trying to overcome hurdles with this market segment for sure. I think like the other panelists have alluded to, still trying to work more with kind of the last frontier of this market, right? The income qualified renters, both single family and multifamily, maybe even particularly multifamily, where it's individually metered and the split incentive is challenging to overcome there. Our goal is to reduce, I think, like Jason alluded to, our goal is to reduce the need for impact investing. Like in 2 years, if we're still using impact investments in the same way as we are today, we don't feel like we've really made the progress we want to make. Moving the market to be the ones actively participating and investing in these spaces is really the end goal. And driving that impact without the need or as much of a need for philanthropic investment or kind of incentives to help support that. And so one of the things that we've been looking for is kind of more flexible and longer term financing, ways to kind of spread out the cost of financing, cost of capital to be on par or in parity with the savings from solar, which are kind of a more longer term proposition. So I think that's one thing that could be really helpful. And kind of like in the last question, something else that would be helpful to us from an institutional investor standpoint is just a little bit more standardization and having consistency kind of across the board in how investors view projects, kind of hurdles and returns that they're looking for, and abilities to kind of streamline the process of that diligence and investing process would be really helpful. And then, we love all the programs New York has. So the more that we can spread some of that, and using alternative means of energy credit scores and evaluating kind of risk is helpful. So.
Great, thanks, Joel. And yeah, same question to Cullen and Jason, if you'd like to chime in. Any final hurdles you're still trying to address, or maybe anything that, going into a meeting with investors, something that a message that you wish they already had going into a meeting, if that makes sense.
Sure. A couple of hurdles we have that we're dealing with. They're not specifically financing related, but financing can sort of help mitigate a little bit. One of them is just sort of construction costs, right? Trying to always have construction costs line up with the amount of savings that the customer needs. Now, how can financing help here? Well, just being able to work with as low rates and low cost as possible will help us as we continue to scale this portion of the industry, continue to get more volume and bring those costs down further, right? So there's sort of a which came first thing that goes on right there. And so, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face. And then another one is educating the market and educating the customers to really, what is this whole thing of electrification? What are the benefits to you as an individual? And then really, what are the benefits to a building owner, right? And so we have lots of ways of articulating that. And it's still something that the customers need to come up to speed on, right? Air source heat pumps, just calling that technology out, are well known in a lot of ways, but still to do a switch and say, hey, you had a gas boiler and now you've got to go electric. We get the question of, well, is it inefficient? I thought electric is inefficient. And then there's a whole lot of other things that come along after that. And so, I mean, that's what we see as a role of the no money down financing for us, that we can say, hey, look, you have a lot of questions, but let us answer some of those. You don't need to take our word for it, just sign up and we will take care of a lot of these things and you'll learn. And as you go, then you can make the choice at the end of the contract. Do you want to own it yourself or do you want us to continue to help manage it for you? And so, I think that is the no money down role in particular.
Thanks.
And Molly, just quickly from me, a little over 2 years ago, Governor Cuomo announced that New York Green Bank would be seeking to raise third-party capital. I mentioned earlier, we have $1 billion of capital. We've committed over about $1.5 billion, and currently have commitments of, I believe, a little over 800 million. So as you can see, the investable capital getting smaller. That's a great thing, right? We've found opportunities to deploy capital. But we'd like to do a lot more. We are excited that we are continuing with that effort to raise third-party capital. And I am very optimistic that we're going to raise capital this year have a private source of capital on the New York Green Bank platform, which will enable us to do more with the ratepayers' money and provide more benefits to all New Yorkers.
Great. Thanks so much to each of you. Thanks so much for joining, Colin, Joel, and Jason. I really appreciate it. I think it's 1 o'clock now. Mike, should I hand it over to you? Do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, sure. Just a couple things as we wrap up. I just want to thank you all for a really enlightening conversation about the challenges and opportunities in the LMI space. And again, as for all of you that enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to consider membership for the Impact Capital Forum as a great way to support these type of conversations in the future. And with that, I think we can call it a day. Everybody have a great afternoon, and thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks,
Again.
everybody.
Bye.